Hey, it's Benjie Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have J D Manders. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, The Fairy Child, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I will say, JD was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Parchment Global Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, move it to Parchment. You can find them at parchmentglobalpublishing.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute honor and such a delight to have JD here on the line with us. His book we're going to be discussing today, The Fairy Child, is such an amazing narrative because, listen, right off the bat, on the surface level, it's a fictional narrative, okay? So we're going to be following these characters as they embark upon their own journey. But what is so wonderful about it is it's specifically geared for families, for children of deployed soldiers. Right? And it helps them overcome their separation anxiety. And it's something that, JD, of course, being a military person himself, has a lot of experience in. So you know that everything that he's going to articulate is really coming from a great place. It's coming from a true and authentic place. And it's something that I absolutely love. It's something that here on our network, it's really going to be a first for me. I mean, we've had military personnel on our show in the past, but I've never had a military personnel on the line talking about a book of this magnitude. I love it. Listen, JD is the expert on the matter. I'm so glad that we have him here because he's going to be able to articulate all the nuances in his book much better than I ever could. So without further ado, let's bring him here on the line with us. JD, first and foremost, thank you very much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you, Benji.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're very excited to have you here. Again, thank you so much for your service. Now, before we go into the book itself, let's start off. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about yourself and how you came about being a children's author.
So I've been a writer for more than 20 years. I actually started off as a technical writer for a computer company. I live in the Rocket City in Huntsville, Alabama, which of course is one of the highest technology areas in the country. I was trained as a historian, and I write history mostly for the Army related to technology and engineering subjects. However, my first published work of fiction was this children's book that I wrote for my daughters while I was deployed in 2004. I've been married since 1993, and I have two wonderful children who were 7 and 3 at the time I deployed. So it was a really big struggle when I left. I've been in the National Guard pretty much since I was 18. So I think I was approximately 34 at the time that I deployed.
Wow. What an amazing story, and really a great turn of events in terms of how you were able to utilize your own experiences to really impact not only your family, but I'm sure so many families once they pick up this book. Now, JD, next question I'd love to go into is really tell us about the events that led you to write The Fairy Child.
So I was called up with the Army National Guard in 2003. And I was absent for about 16 months. Now, at that time, deployments could last as long as 18 months. Today, they usually last under a year. So, of course, it's still difficult being away from your family. Anyway, this was the first time that I had been away from home for more than a few weeks. Mm-hmm. At that time, the internet was very limited. There was no social media to speak of, and there was no cell phone coverage overseas. So you could only call home on DSN lines about once a week. And my daughters were really struggling. They were having nightmares. They were sleepwalking, acting out in school. I remember one occasion in particular when I drove into Iraq, and the trip took us 3 days, and I was not able to stop or to call home along the way because we were in a convoy. And when we got there, we immediately stopped at a store, and every soldier there called home. Well, when I called home, I learned from my wife that my daughter had set the kitchen on fire, accidentally,
Wow.
of course.
Yeah.
So I realized that I needed a way to connect with them and to keep them involved and to keep them from worrying about me. So I decided to write them a story using themselves as characters. And I figured that they would relate most to fairy tales. So I wrote it in a classic fairy tale format. I wrote it over about 6 months, and I emailed the chapters home. And of course I'm busy. I have my military job that I'm working on. But I every spare minute I found myself writing this story. And then I would email the chapters home, and my wife would print them out and would read them to my children. And they had an immediate impact. Almost right away, they started turning around. Their behavior was a lot better. Now, when I got home, it took me several years to publish the book, really until about 2013. But I've recently republished a revised edition, which is available on Amazon and other book vendors.
Fantastic. What a beautiful story. Listen, JD, let's not wait any longer. The Fairy Child. Tell us a little bit about your book.
So as I mentioned, the story is about two little girls whose names are also Sarah and Lily, just like my own. And they're kidnapped by fairies while they're playing in their backyard. And once they're in this magical land, the fairy queen tells them that the reason that she brought them was to help to rescue her son, the fairy child, who was also kidnapped by an evil witch.
Mm-hmm.
And so immediately the girls have to decide whether or not they're going to help the stranger. And so the fairies end up sending them on an adventure where they meet a lot of different magical creatures, and they have a lot of different adventures. And one of the characters is an elf who is turned into a mouse, who is a very strong male character in the book, and he helps them along in their journey. Well, they end up getting caught up in this war against the evil forces of the witch. And so as they're experiencing all of this, they have to learn to be brave. They have to learn not to miss their parents. They have to learn to endure hardship. And at the end of the story, they return successfully. And their father comes home from war. And when he talks to them, he finds out that they've become much more mature. And this is an issue that a lot of soldiers face. Many people go off to war, and they come back and find that their children have changed, especially very young children. Mm-hmm. But in the case of the book, the father comes back and finds that they were changed for the better.
Wonderful. Now, JD, we know the final product, of course, and really how beneficial this book was for you and for your family. Now, really getting into the intricacies of this, how did your book help your children overcome your absence during your deployment?
Well, as I noted, they immediately improved. And one of the reasons for that is that it really distracted them from my being gone. And so they were absorbed into this fictional world. And as I sent things home, I mean, it was really amazing. They were out playing in the yard and playing fairy market and having a lot of games with it. Later on, my youngest daughter, who was 3 at the time, and she tells me now that she doesn't remember the book, but she said that she had all of these strange memories of these things happening to her and her going on these adventures. And so she felt like she was really experiencing it. And so that's one of the powers of fiction, is being able to suggest things. And so by suggesting to these characters that they can be brave, that they can stand up to danger, that they don't have to miss their parents, then it helps them to learn those things. And so one of the things that came out of this was that they became much more responsible and reliable. A lot of children, deployed soldiers, are very sulky and they refuse to help their parents. But Sarah actually started putting her younger sibling down to bed, helping her to brush her teeth and just helping out around the house. And they did become a lot braver and more mature. And of course, this continued once I got home. They would go out and still play their make-believe games with the other children in the neighborhood. And I learned that they had passed my story around and had begun to share it with others. And so I got a lot of positive feedback from them about how that the same story was helping them, even though they weren't, parents or children of, they weren't children of service members, but they also had issues with being separated from their parents from time to time.
JD, in your opinion, what is it about fiction, fairy tales, and fantasy that helps children deal with those separation issues?
Well, of course, you've heard of J.R. Tolkien, who is the author of The Lord of the Rings. Well, he wrote an essay called On Fairy Stories. And in it, he lays out how that fairy tales and fantasy stories are actually beneficial. Some people say that fantasy is a waste of time, that it's not reality. But he discusses these three major benefits. And first, he talks about escapism. Today, that term has a bad connotation, but at the time, he simply meant being absorbed into a story so that you momentarily forget your pain and suffering. And really, all fiction does that. But fairy tales especially helps to bring you into this world where you're totally detached from what's going on around you, and you can actually heal. Second, Tolkien talks about how that all fairy tales have supernatural elements. There's magic or magical beings that help the protagonist along the way. And in the same way, fairy tales help to remind us that there are forces out there who will help us if we will call on them. And third, all fairy tales have a happy ending, or what he called a eucatastrophe, which was basically a turning where things are as bleak as they can possibly be, and then all of a sudden you have victory. And in a fairy tale, this helps to remind us that everything is going to turn out okay in the end.
Great points. Great points. Thank you so much for sharing, JD. Listen, we know about how this book helped your family. We know, as you stated, how this book helped, surrounding families as well. Now, have you been able to use this book to help other soldiers?
Yes. After I got back, I became involved in a lot of veteran and military and yellow ribbon organizations that help service members of their families. And after I published the book, I found it a useful tool to share my experiences and discuss ways of dealing with separation anxiety and other deployment issues. So I spoke to a lot of groups about, how to manage expectations when you're getting ready to deploy, how to communicate with your children, how to connect with them, how to deal with discipline in a positive way, and how to use your shared experiences to get your children to open up. So in 2017, after I received a lot of questions about these issues, I started a blog to write about all of these problems. And of course, I'm not a psychologist, so my advice is not medical, but it's as a parent who has dealt with these issues. And it's really been one of the joys of my life to help service members and their families.
Wonderful, JD. Guys, again, here on the line with J D Manders. We just finished discussing his book, The Fairy Child, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But guys, listen, that's not all, okay? That was the main point of today's interview. That was the main book that we really wanted to focus on. But JD has other books as well that he's written. Now, I want to go into this next one. JD, talk to us. Let our listening audience know, what is the Mermaids Quest about?
So I wrote the Mermaids Quest during my second deployment in 2012. my children had asked me to write another book while I was deployed when I told them I was leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of roped into it. And it was a sequel to The Fairy Child. It's very similar in structure, but not in the setting or in the characters. And so basically, Sarah and Lily follow a mermaid under the waves, and by magic they're able to breathe. And they find that the mermaids need the children to recover a magic trident from a wizard who has moved into the sandcastle that the children had built on the beach. And so they feel a sense of responsibility because they left their sandcastle standing, and now it's occupied. And so they go on this adventure to do that, and they go through underwater wrecks in the Bermuda Triangle and Atlantis, and a very deep pit, as well as the sandcastle. And like the first book, they have to take responsibility for their mistakes and make good decisions, and they have to be brave and learn to face trials. And so it's very similar in tone, but it was actually a much longer, slightly longer, and much more detailed book.
And then next we have the Christmas letters. Tell us a little bit about that one.
That's actually a nonfiction book. I didn't write it. I didn't finish it while I was deployed, but I did start it while I was deployed. And the story is that I called my wife one day, and she explained how that Sarah's teacher had told her that there was no Santa Claus. And so she started asking all of these questions. And so my wife asked me if I would write her. And so I started a series of letters discussing what Christmas means. As I said, I didn't finish the letters until I got home. And so, not being Christmas, I waited until the next Christmas and then gave them to her. And basically, the letters address issues like the meaning of the ornaments and the traditions, the meaning behind Christmas and New Year and the Epiphany, being a cheerful giver, taking care of the less fortunate, and respecting your family. And after I had published The Fairy Child, I decided that the letters could also help children who were dealing with similar issues. And I published that book in 2016.
Fantastic. As we continue on, JD, we've covered the 3 books that you've written. What's next for you? I mean, do you have any other books in the works?
Well, I always have something in the works. I actually wrote another Sarah and Lily story during my last deployment, which is I've been on 3. But I've not had time to do anything with it yet because of COVID and everything. Mm-hmm. And I've written numerous short stories and poems over the years for my children, and I am looking at publishing those. But as I noted previously, I'm actually a historian, and so I continue to research a number of topics related to technology and military history. And so I expect that probably those things will end up getting published before what is essentially a side area, an area that I got into really accidentally.
Absolutely. How can people find out more about your books or your blog?
Okay, well, my blog is available on WordPress.com under J D Manders. And so I usually post something about once a week, and the topics are related to faith, family, or faithful service. And so sometimes they're historical. Sometimes they comment on the issues of the day. Mostly I try to focus on family issues, on ways that people can improve their faith, or how that service impacts our lives. My books are all available on sale on public e-commerce sites like Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But the main place where I do most of my transactional business in terms of interacting with people is on my Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/author J D Manders. I post my blog there, and I post a lot of other fun stuff along with announcements of any activities I may have planned. I do a lot of local events, although this year and last year I've been fairly quiet because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we want to be safe. But I do hope to get more involved in local events as things start opening up again.
There you have it. Guys, what more can be said? You know what you got to do. Head on over, as JD said, to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Pick up your copies, starting with The Fairy Child, The Mermaids Quest, and then finally finishing up with the Christmas letters. Keep checking frequently on his Facebook page to find out more information about what he has going on, to interact with JD specifically. And listen, guys, again, wonderful journeys created out of a necessity really just for his own family, but something that can be applied to anyone's. So it's a great gift for anybody else's children. It's a wonderful journey for you to embark upon with your own. Listen, there's nothing more that can be said. Go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble. You surely will not be disappointed. JD, thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thank you, Benjie.